Welcome to the ENAGO webinar on how to become a peer reviewer. My name is Michael Brieler. I'm currently a distinguished professor of media and communication studies at Hallym University in South Korea, which is one of the top-ranked media schools. I've published in numerous social science citation index journals and have conducted reviews for more than 30 top journals in the humanities and social sciences, published by Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, Routledge, and Sage, among others. In addition, I'm also a member of the editorial board of one of the top journals in my area. So overall, I'm very familiar with the peer review process and also about how to become a peer reviewer. And I would like to give you some insights and advice in this webinar. So the agenda for today is the following. First, I will speak about the value of peer review. And after that, I will speak about the peer review models, selection criteria for reviewers, why it is important to be a peer reviewer, tips for researchers, how to draft a review. Also, I will provide tips to evaluate a research paper systematically. I will speak about flaws of peer review, and in the end, I will give ethical guidelines for reviewers. So let's start thinking about the value of peer review. At the beginning, let's look at the publishing process to better understand actually what role peer review plays. So at the beginning, the author, you see here, submits an article and to a journal, and this article is assessed by the editor. The editor will then think about if the article content is new and matches the scope of the journal. If the editor believes that this is not the case, then the editor will immediately reject the journal. This is called desk rejected. In case the editor sees a value in the article, he or she will send the article to reviewers. Reviewers are generally experts in your area, and they will provide feedback. This might take quite some time, normally between 3 and 6 months. And after that, 3 to 6 months, the reviewers send their comments and evaluation to the editor, and then the editor is basically assessing these reviews. And based on these reviews, the editor then makes a decision whether he rejects the manuscript or article, or he or she gives the author a chance to revise the manuscript based on the comments of the reviewers. In that case, the authors make a revision and resubmit the manuscript after some weeks or months, depending on how heavy the revision is, and will send it again to the journal. The editor checks it again sends it out normally to the same reviewers, and ideally after 1 or 2 of these rounds, finally the editor will accept the manuscript. So that's the ideal case, and then it goes into production and publication. So what you see in this process is how important actually the peer review is. The peer review is basically the most essential part in the whole publication process. Without peer review, there will be no decision whether articles are accepted or not. So what is actually peer review? Peer review is the evaluation of scientific, academic, or professional work by experts working in the same research field. It's used by journals, grant application committees, ethics committees, and conference paper editorial boards. In this presentation, however, we will only be talking about peer review for publication in journals. Peer review is a quality control method used by publishers to maintain the credibility of their journals. Actually, not all scholarly journals are peer-reviewed journals, but I would say that most of the good, high-quality journals are peer-reviewed. Peer review sits at the heart of scholarly publishing and has a significant impact on the rate at which science advances. In a survey among more than 2,000 researchers by Elsevier's customer insights, these researchers were asked about the effectiveness of peer review, and they gave the following answers, which are quite similar between 2015 and 2009. So the main reason kind of why they think peer review is a good idea is improving the quality of the published papers. 74% agreed that peer review is improving the quality of the published paper. 63% agree that peer review determines the originality of the manuscript. A bit less think the peer review determines importance of the findings. So this is kind of on the positive side. However, these researchers also acknowledge that in other areas peer review is actually less successful. For example, in detecting fraud, only 41% think that peer review is successful, and even less in the case of detecting plagiarism. There are certainly better ways than peer review. There are already plagiarism softwares that are quite accurate and find actually plagiarism much better than peer reviews. So let's think about the value to science. Peer review's value to science. Peer review is an effective form of research evaluation to help select the highest quality articles for publication. That's the main idea, that the reviewers have to decide whether this is a high quality article or not. That's why the reviewers should also be experts in the area. Reviewers are independent of the journals, editorial boards, and the research work under review. However, certainly if the editor thinks that one of the members of the editorial boards fit particularly well as a reviewer for that research area, he or she might also choose one of the members of the editorial board. The filtering process and the feedback improve the quality of the published articles. So that's the general idea, that basically the not so good articles get filtered out and the better articles will survive the process and will finally get published. So let's look at some peer review models to better understand how this whole system actually works. So basically there are mainly two types of peer review models. One is the closed peer review and the other one is the open peer review. In the case of closed peer review, we have single blind review, double blind review, and triple blind review, and we will look in all of these categories in the following slides. So let's start with the single blind review. In the case of single blind review, the identity of the reviewer is not disclosed. However, reviewers are aware of the author's identity. Reviewers can interact amongst themselves during the review. This is often the case in the case of single blind review. And there are several journals, for example, Journal of Ecology, that have this approach. Generally, this single blind peer review is more common in life, health, and natural science, while in the areas of social science and humanities, double-blind review is more common. So what is double-blind review? In that case, identities of both authors and reviewers are not disclosed to each other. Editors mediate the interaction, for example, in journals like Nature Geosciences, or as I previously mentioned, basically nearly all social science and humanities journals. And then there's still triple blind review. In that case, authors, reviewers, as well as editors are blind to each other's identity, so nobody knows about each other. This has certainly some advantages because the double blind review also leads to some unethical biases. So if the editors know the names, and these are famous names, or they come from famous universities, as we will see in some of the next slides, this might lead to some biases and maybe to decisions that the editor more likely will accept the article than, for example, from scholars that are from less famous universities. So then let's look at the open peer review. In that model, basically, everybody knows everybody. So it's kind of the opposite of the triple blind review. So in that case, everybody knows the identities of everybody. Open peer review aims to make classical peer review more transparent and accountable. It includes various alternative review methods that keep certain aspects of the review process open to the research community or to the public. It increases opportunities to spot errors, validate findings, and the overall credibility of published outputs. open peer review models and workflows are constantly evolving and improving with time. So very often also it's not only a few reviewers, but even the readers can often comment on the articles, but there are different kind of models existing on that. So types of open peer review model, so-called open identity. This form discloses the names of authors and reviewers who commented on a paper. And then open disclosure, in that case, all the reviewer comments are published alongside the article. So that's very interesting. You even see the reviewer comments. In that case, certainly, there's a special effort on the reviewer side to write very good comments, because they are also read in the same way as the article itself. Then there's also transferable and collaborative peer review. Transferable peer review basically refers to the case that your article got rejected by a journal, but they think the article nevertheless has some value, but might better fit to another journal, generally published by the same publishing company. So the editor is recommending other journal, or the publishing company other journal, and they are then transferring the peer review from the first journal to the second journal. The advantage is certainly it reduces the burden on the reviewer community. The reviews can be used, the original ones, and maybe some new additional reviews will be added. In the case of collaborative peer review, two or more researchers review and discuss the paper amongst themselves or with the authors of the manuscript to make it publishable. It encourages constructive criticism and dialogue between authors and reviewers. So let's think about how actually reviewers are selected. So selection criteria for reviewers. Generally, journal editors look for assistance from reviewers to help them decide whether to accept or reject a paper. A reviewer is expected to provide constructive assessment that will help the authors improve their manuscripts. Comments in the review report need to be rational, logical, and helpful, highlighting how the paper might be revised to the highest quality possible. So again, the editor is basically searching for somebody who can help him or her decide if the paper is valuable or not, and also help the authors basically improve the quality of the manuscript. So how can authors suggest reviewers? That's some more about the author side. There are some journals actually that are asking the authors, whom do you recommend as a reviewer? And if that's the case, there are some things you should be careful about. Generally, these reviewers or referees should not be current or recent collaborators of the authors. They should also not be affiliated to the same institutions as the authors. However, they can be members of the journal's editorial board or authors of papers that have been cited in the study. So that's very common to actually suggest authors which you find that they are doing a very good work, and authors you referred to in your own article. These suggestions are certainly considered by the editors, but they do not necessarily approach those same referees. Generally, they might take maybe one of your suggestions and add one or two other reviewers they know themselves. So how do journals select reviewers? So there are several approaches, and what the editors are considering in the journals. First, certainly academic qualification. Doesn't have to be necessarily a PhD, but at least they should be in some kind of academic programs. So there are some ways to actually evaluate this academic qualification from the journal perspective. Theoretical or technical expertise in particular area, publishing experience, that's very important. So very often actually reviewers approached who already published in that journal. The editor already knows them. He or she already knows that they're writing, they're experts in that particular area. And ability to critically analyze a paper and be objective, ability to write in-depth, constructive and comprehensive reviews, and linguistic proficiency. Some of these points might be more important than others. So what is also important to note here is that a researcher might be asked by the editors to review the whole manuscript or only specific parts of it. This is especially often the case when it comes down to like questions about statistics, for example. There might be some reviewers who are saying, oh, the manuscript is interesting and so on, but I'm not sure if this statistical analysis is really appropriate, and then the editor is really asking a real expert on statistics only to check this particular part of the paper if this is appropriate or not. A researcher is already in the journal database is usually preferred by the editor. So in that case, it means how can you actually come in the journal database? Most of the time it means that you submitted an article to that journal. It doesn't necessarily mean that you were accepted by the journal. You can also be rejected by the journal, but the editor nevertheless sees that you do a good work, but of whatever reason, nevertheless you were not accepted, but the editor thinks that you do a good work. That's why you get some basically rated and get some points in the database of the journal. And when then an article is submitted again that is in a similar area like your own research, you might be approached then by the editor. So the question is, why is it important actually to be a peer reviewer? So why should we actually do that? It takes a lot of time. We do this most of the time for free. So why should people actually do that? So there are different reasons why to do it. One is becoming a peer reviewer certainly helps to keep up with the latest thinking in the field of interest. So thinking about articles that come for peer review are really new. They're the newest knowledge in the area, while if they get published, this might take 1 or 2 years. So when you read just the publications in the journal itself, this might take much longer time. So you really are up to date. Then being a peer reviewer can also help in effective networking within the research community. This might help to build new connections for future collaborations. It also helps in boosting one's career as a researcher, wherein the recruitment committees give considerable importance to the contribution as a peer reviewer. So again, some search committees are also considering peer review. Working as a regular reviewer may also be the first step to becoming a member of the journal's editorial board. This is actually something that happens very often. Somebody who published an article in the journal and also was multiple times peer reviewer, everything done with high quality. Finally, the editor might approach this person and ask the person to become member of the editorial board, and that's also looking good in your CV and so on. So again, helps you when you search a job one day. Reviewing encourage also to think critically about what makes an article good, and that in turn helps to improve their own writing. So that means if you think critically about other articles and realize the problems these articles and papers have, then you might kind of better understand actually how to write yourself a good article. And continuous reviewing makes a researcher aware of the standards of research accepted by the journal and helps in producing manuscripts with a higher chance of acceptance. So again, you're part of the process in this journal to review, and you give comments, and then you also see what the other reviewer actually, normally you can also read then the reviews of the other reviewers. You also see what they are saying, and then you see the final decision by the editor, if accepted or rejected or a major revision, for example. So you get an idea actually what you have to do in the future yourself in order to get accepted. So let's look again at the survey here, the same survey as before by Elsevier Customer Insight of more than 2,000 researchers. So actually they were asked for reasons why they do reviewing, and the most important reason was playing a part as a member of the community with 93%, 83% enjoy helping to improve the paper, 74% reciprocating others reviewing work. That means somebody's reviewing my work, so I should also review other people's work. And finally, 72% say enjoy seeing work ahead of publication. Much less people said actually enhance my reputation of future career, because especially most employers don't care very much. Maybe when you search a job, this might have a bit an impact, but not if you're already in a university at the moment. For promotion, it helps very little or nothing. Maybe this will change in the future, but at the moment, it's not the case. Increase the chance of a place on the editorial board, 24%. As I previously mentioned, this works sometimes. Increase the chance of future acceptances. I would say normally this does not increase the chance of future acceptances. That's also why very few people actually said that. So reasons, on the other hand, why people were actually declining to review, the most important one is they're too busy. The second one is outside area of expertise. So that's important. Outside area of expertise means you don't think you're an expert in the area. So actually in that case, you should really better not review, because it might be also unfair to the authors of the paper. So then here, 86% of respondents have reviewed an article in the last 2 to 3 years. Those under 36 were less likely, while those aged 56 to 65 were more likely to have reviewed. 82% agreed without peer review there's no control in scientific communication. So again, for controlling it's important. 74% agreed peer review improves the quality of the published paper. 65% were satisfied with peer review. On the other hand, 28% agreed peer review is unsustainable because there are too few willing reviewers. So that's one of the many problems of peer review, as we will see later on. So let's look at some tips for researchers. So how to commence peer reviewing? That's the main question here. First of all, maintain and update your profile on scholarly communication networks such as LinkedIn, Google Scholar, and so on to get noticed by the editors. Create an ORCID ID for yourself to make your complete profile more accessible. Keep a watch and read the latest published literature in your field in order to stay up to date. Network effectively across the publishing community to improve your chances of getting a recommendation for reviewing. Establish strong collaborations in your field as well as outside of your field to get recommendations. And last but not least, if you're an early career, early stage researcher, ask your mentor or supervisor for a suitable opportunity to review an article. So if you're not so much involved yourself yet, maybe you know somebody else who might be able to tell you actually how to do that. So before you start, you must actually read the article's abstract sent by the journal along with the review invitation before making a decision. So generally you receive an email, and in this email the editor is writing to you that he invites you as a reviewer, and all you receive is an abstract. You don't receive the article yet. You will only receive the paper or article when you finally agreed to review it. So the abstract will give you a clear understanding of the manuscript contents. So read it several times. Think about if you can really contribute something to that area of research. Keep the format of the peer review report required by the journal in mind. So either informal, formal, or both. I think mostly it's quite formal actually what the journals want. Beware also of so-called predatory journals. It's kind of a waste of time to review for them, and not just review for them. I would say even more importantly, mostly they don't ask people to review anyway. More importantly, actually don't submit to these journals. There's a very long list here. I cannot go through all these points, but to say very simply, very often if there is some publication fees included, especially if they are hidden somewhere on the websites, then you have to be very cautious about the journals. There are also some databases like here Open Access Journals, Directory of Open Access Journals, for example, and approved by the DOAJ seal, these kind of things. There are also journal lists actually where you can see if this is a good journal or a predatory journal that just wants to earn money. In general, I think you should get knowledgeable about the journals in your area and your field. And if you know the names, then you will be less likely to review or to submit articles to a predatory journal. If you're unsure about a journal and you're a more junior scholar, you might also ask some of your colleagues. They generally know the journals very well, and they will immediately tell you that they never heard about this journal, or they even know that this is a predatory journal. So the question is now, finally, you accepted a review, and then how you actually draft such a review. If you do this the first time, there might be several challenges. So there are some tips to structure the review. Actually, few journals have specific requirements. I mean, they give you some general questions maybe which you should answer, but in some journals might have some guidelines which is provided to you after the review invitation is accepted. But as I said, not that often actually, so it's increasing nowadays. Online peer review websites are also used by some journals that feature a structured form with complete questions, rating scales, or scores. In case of no guidelines, the reviewers need to go about generally a four-way technique: first look, second look, third look, and finalizing the review. This is just a suggestion now. I would say every reviewer is doing it in a slightly different way. So let's look in this four-way review technique. In the first look is meant for a quick look through the manuscript to draft a synopsis in 1 or 2 paragraphs explaining the research question. If you find a major flaw with the paper, including language, methodology, or hypothesis, and decide it is unpublishable in the first look, you can write the reason for your decision clearly in the review report. And in that case, I have to say mostly in the review report to the editor. Editors generally don't like it when you write comments to the authors. In most journals, there is comments to the editors and comments to the authors, and most editors don't like if you write already the authors that you reject something or you accept something, because that's actually the decision of the editor, not the decision of the reviewer. Then the second look, you should give manuscripts a second look if you consider the paper suitable for deeper review after the first look. You must enlist your comments and suggestions along with page, paragraph, and line references from the manuscript text. This will help the authors to understand your comments better and address them individually. Then a third look. After a thorough second look, the third look is mostly for additional comments, if any, on the overall writing or language or grammar. In case several grammatical errors in the manuscript, you can highlight that in one single comment. For example, please send the article for proofreading to improve the overall quality of the manuscript. And finally, finalizing review. Once the review is complete, you must reread your own comments in order to check that they are clear, constructive, self-explanatory, not derogatory. Also check for any typos and grammatical errors from your end. You can go ahead and submit the review report once these are checked. So again, to say very clearly, be friendly as a reviewer. Very often, especially early career researchers, get very frustrated when they get rejections, which is the common result actually, unfortunately. So be polite, be constructive. And in that sense, I would also say, in my case, generally, I mostly go beyond the first look. It must be really a horrible paper that I only make a first look. I always try to be constructive and add actually additional comments for improving the manuscript. So tips to evaluate a research paper systematically based on the different parts of the paper. So let's start with the title. The title must correctly convey the findings of the paper. The title should not be lengthy. If the title includes any acronyms that are not universally recognized, you can give your feedback to the author about it. So in other words, avoid it. The title must not have phrases or puns which have an element of humor in them, as that might affect the influence of the paper. In case the paper is based on a tool or technology, it needs to be mentioned in the title. So that's about the title. So the title should be very clear. Actually, the title is one of the most important parts actually of the paper. This is where people think about if this is related to their research or not. Then introduction. Actually, between is the abstract missing. Abstract is also important, since especially the reviewers are also reading the abstract first and decide based on that. So again, the abstract should be a very well-made summary actually of the paper. So then the introduction. The reviewer needs to check if the introduction lays a sound background of the study and the research question being discussed. The introduction should also mention how authors have been able to solve some of the unanswered questions in the current study. The length of the introduction should not be more than 4 to 6 short paragraphs with short sentences, even though this depends certainly on the academic disciplines. There are some variations. As a reviewer, you can also add comments if the review of the existing literature is not up to date. Actually, that's a kind of negative point. If they're not up to date, it kind of shows the literature is not up to date, kind of shows they are maybe not experts in the field, which is already indicating some problems. And reviewers generally read the rest of the manuscript and already much more critical. Then the method. The method section of the manuscript should clearly describe the process, apparatus, and details about the test subject used to conduct the research. As a reviewer, you need to make sure that the authors have used justifiable techniques for sampling and analyzing the results, and comments in case you have suggestions on better techniques. Also add your comments in case the method section does not mention a control group, but as a subject expert, check if the research process should have had one. So method section again is in my case, a major reason also always for rejection. If there's a problem in the method, it basically means all the results are not valid to a certain extent, and that makes the whole manuscript very problematic and often leads to rejection in my case. And I know from other reviewers, they also think the method you can really often find, unfortunately, a lot of problems in the methods, which leads to rejection. Then the results. The results section should describe all the findings in a detailed manner. The data should also be analyzed in an appropriate manner, for example, neither understated or overstated. As a reviewer, you also need to check that the results section does not compromise with the conclusion. And the 3 important sections of the results section are text, figures, images, and tables. So let's look at the figures and tables. Any images or figures used should display the data in clear, visually engaging format. For example, that means especially high resolution. Each graph in the manuscript should have an apt caption and clearly depict units of measurement, label axis, and the key identifying each element. The reviewers must thoroughly review figures and raise a red flag if they apprehend any signs of image manipulation. So that's certainly a no-go image manipulation. The table must be appropriately captioned and clearly formatted in monochrome. Then discussion and conclusion. A review report should begin with a statement on whether the data in the manuscript succeeded or failed to support the research hypothesis, and then address each of the main findings of the study. The discussion and conclusion section should assess and sum up the results correctly and clearly. Any limitations of the study must also be clearly stated in the conclusion section. It should also articulate implications of the study on the subject area or on the wider world. And finally, supplementary materials and references. The supplementary materials need to be relevant to the current manuscript and presented in clear form and format. The supplementary materials should also contain a caption, legend, summary, and a reference in the article text. Reviewers must make sure that the authors have cited the up-to-date research in the field. All the citations in the text must be included in the reference list and vice versa. So again, that's a kind of a no-go. Be very careful that all your citations in the text are also in the reference list. If I see that there's some missing, it's kind of sloppy style, and then you start asking yourself as a reviewer, they even don't know how to do the reference list. Maybe also the data was done in kind of a sloppy style, so it's not a good sign. So be very careful with the reference list. So the final checklist before making a decision then is the research novel? Is it new basically? Is there something new added to the existing literature? 2, is the paper clear and logical? 3, is the manuscript sufficiently detailed? 4, is the research reproducible? 5, does it add value to its field? 6. Are the results well supported by the methods? So these are some of the main points to consider. And when I say making a decision, it's again, you as a reviewer, you're not really saying accepted, rejected. I mean, you have to click that also, but again, be careful not to write this in the comments to the authors, because that's the role actually of the editor. You can write this to the comments in the editor, to the editor. You can write in your opinion it's rejected, but not in the comments to the authors. Then let's look in the end at some flaws of peer review. So peer review, unfortunately, has also many problems, and that's why it's often also criticized. The biggest problem is bias, which is something I will speak about more in the next slide. And here I cannot go through all of them. I just want to pick out a few. Peer review process is very slow. We mentioned that already. The first round takes 3 to 6 months. There might be another round, another 3 months. So it easily becomes, even if you're very fast and the manuscript is perceived very well, it takes at least 1 year or longer to have to get it finally accepted. There might be also referees are certainly overworked. Most referees are working full-time as a professor. They have administration to do, they have research to do themselves, and they also have to do teaching, and they do basically the reference reviews for free. So again, they are overworked. This is a big problem. In some areas, it's hard to find actually experts review. You might only find 2, but 2 often not enough to make actually a review. Fake reviews, we will speak in a few slides about this. Referees are not compensated, so again they do this for free, so which might sometimes also affect the quality. If you do something for free and you're overworked, you might not want to spend too much time on it. And it's almost impossible to hide the author's identity. Basically, if you really want to find out the author's identity, you Google some of these keywords in the article, and probably you will actually find this research somewhere online. For example, as a conference paper or some early draft version. So, as I mentioned previously, the biggest problem is bias in peer review. It's the most prominent flaw of the traditional peer review system. So authors actually submit a research article to a standard journal with a view that it will be properly reviewed and considered on merit. However, that's not always the case, unfortunately. So there are different kind of biases. There are author-related biases and manuscript-related biases. Let's look first at the author-related biases. So it's basically author reputation. That means in the case of single and double blind review, it means the editor or even the reviewers know the author names. So if this is a famous author, this person might have more chance to get accepted than somebody who's not so famous. Institute affiliation, similar case, famous affiliation, world famous affiliation has some impact compared to an institute or university the editor never heard about. Gender, there's unfortunately some research also that says gender plays a role in acceptance and not acceptance. Geographical background, again, there's some assumption and some bias, kind of a Western bias to a certain extent within some reviewers and some editors who think that these scholars at some mainly Western institutions might be better able to do research than others. So if the paper comes from some other geographical area, some reviewers or some editors might even more critically look at the research. Unfortunately, that's still the case sometimes. And then there are manuscript related biases. Positive results, that means very often journal editors look for positive results or significant results. If something is not significant, it's not so interesting to publish for many editors, even so it's also actually often an interesting result. Poor English language can be very distracting for reviewers, so be careful and use services like Enago, for example, for proofreading in order to avoid this problem of poor English language. And there might be also competitive work. So a reviewer might think that this is actually a competition to their own work, and that's why they might reject it. Unfortunately, should not happen, but it might happen sometimes. So interestingly, one of these biases was kind of confirmed in one study by Peters and Chetji. What they did in 1982 is they chose certain articles that were previously published in high-ranking top journals in psychology, and they were also cited, so which kind of indicates that they have a high quality. And what they did is they took these certain articles and they made then small changes to title, abstract, introduction. They changed the author names, and most importantly, they changed the affiliation or institution, were changed from prestigious to unknown fictitious names. So what was the result of the certain submitted articles? 3 articles were recognized as resubmissions. Okay, so they said we already had a similar article, we don't want it. 1 article only was accepted. Before this certain, all were accepted and kind of became a bit famous in the area. And 8 of them were actually rejected. So that's kind of interesting. These articles were already published in extremely good journals and received a lot of citations, which is an indicator of quality, but nevertheless 8 out of 13 were rejected, which probably shows the bias towards affiliations, academic affiliations. If you come from a good university, famous university, you might have better chances to get accepted than coming from a less famous university. Then another case study here, case study 2, is also kind of interesting cases. As I previously mentioned, there are some journals actually that ask you for reviewers, and this scientist actually made several fake email accounts and then made his own peer review. This is actually a case from South Korea, where I'm at the moment. And so this is basically, this person was writing his own peer reviews. So this is certainly something that should not be done. And not surprisingly, all these kind of things, I would say, just don't do it, because most of the time it will come out one day. So then ethical guidelines for peer reviewers, that's the last part. And first of all, think about the duties of the reviewers. Number 1 is you should have the ability to contribute significantly to editorial decisions. 2, maintaining confidentiality, so don't speak with other people about it. 3, alertness to ethical issues. 4, maintaining standards of objectivity and competing interests. So the COPE, which is the Committee on Publication Ethics, they had several guidelines, and they were saying the following: reviewers should carry out fair and constructive reviews. So again, constructive is very important. Don't become too negative. Don't become kind of aggressive. Even if you really think this is a horrible paper, don't write it in that way. Write it in a more productive and constructive way. Provide reviews in a timely manner, so don't be slow. That's actually the main reason why the editor writes you back not after 3 months but after 5 months. The main reason is mostly because the reviewers are so slow and they don't answer, and whatever other problems involved. Respect the confidentiality of peer review. So again, don't go around and tell everybody, oh, I'm reviewing now this and that paper and I will reject it or accept it. Refrain from using information gained from the paper under review. There have been some very unfortunate cases that reviewers actually kind of took some of the information and tried to publish it themselves. Later on it came out. Again, a scandal. Again, not worth trying it, because it will come out one day anyway. Declare all potential conflict of interest. So if you realize for example, the author, you might finally reject to review, or you discuss the issue with the editor and how far you're nevertheless able to objectively review the manuscript or not. Provide journals with accurate personal and professional information. Not impersonate another individual to perform a review. So this is what we saw previously, some kind of fake review. And not contact the authors of the paper directly. So in the case of single peer review, you know the names of the authors. So in that case, don't contact them. This is unethical. So, and my final note, actually, we all spoke now so long about why it's important to do peer review, and it's a good idea to do peer review. But nevertheless, at the end, also a small warning. It's very important. Peer review, it's a very big contribution to academic community, and I think you can also learn a lot for your own work when doing peer review. But nevertheless, researchers also need to balance their time effectively between participating in peer review and conducting as well as writing their own research work. So it should also not be that like it is sometimes, it has also been in my case sometimes, that in some months I'm so busy with reviewing papers, having every week 1 or 2 papers to review, that I find actually very little time to do my own research and write my own papers and articles. So again, you should actually make some kind of balance here. That's kind of my final suggestion. Even so, I very strongly encourage you to do reviews, but really think about it case by case and how busy you are otherwise. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. And there's also some websites you might be interested to check out, like this Enago Learn, which you can look, and there's a lot of valuable information you can find also related to peer review, related to how to publish articles and so on.